Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on how to build a data model, and in this presentation I'm going to use a real-world scenario. The data model will use products plus categorizations of products, orders, sales and geographical data. The data is publicly available and can be downloaded from Complex. On screen to the left you will see Complex Contoso v2 download link. In this presentation I will be making use of Microsoft's fictitious company Contoso database, so you might wish to pause the video and download the database. In the near future I will be publishing an AdventureWorks publicly accessible BI site, again a Microsoft database making use of SQL. My objective for this site is to allow registered users to experience Power BI capabilities before making the decision to add this service to their own organizational resources. However, for this presentation I have decided to use Contoso database as I thought most users would have access to Microsoft Access software. What you are looking at on screen are Contoso table relationships we will need to build. You might want to pause the video at this point and take notes. The Contoso v2 data model consists of 5 different elements: 2 Access databases, 2 Excel spreadsheets and a SQL query text file. I should point out, if you have access to SQL Server and your preference is to use SQL Server, then download Contoso v1. Whichever version of Contoso you choose to download, the next step is to build your data model, and this is what I'm going to do next. The data tables I'm going to be using are all Contoso sales and product categories, Access database tables. I should also be making use of Excel geography and stores spreadsheets. Now I've covered the preliminaries, let's return to Excel. If you watched earlier presentations in the series, you probably can guess my next step. I click the Power Pivot table and click Manage icon. When the pivot table window opens, I click the From Database icon and select Access. Now I have to navigate to the Contoso file location and select Contoso Sales and click Open. If you don't see Access database you want, make sure you click File Name drop down and then select All Files. This option will list all the files in the folder. Next, I click the Test Connection button. All is OK, so I click Next. I accept the selected default from a list of tables and views to choose the Data to Import Radio button and click Next. I require all tables, so I place a tick to select all. If I want, I can change the table's friendly name. In most cases, you probably want to do so. The reason in most cases is the given table names lack relevance to users, so if you feel this is the case, this is where you can make those changes. At the same time, you can click to highlight a table and click the Preview and Filter button to view the table. I'm going to choose Fact Sales to preview. I'm happy with the table, so I click OK and then click Finish. I should warn you, before you click Finish, make sure you are not running any unnecessary applications. The reason you need as much memory as you have available. The sales table will take a while to process the 2 million plus rows. Before we move on, you probably noticed at the bottom Data Preparation Completed, the hyperlink named Details. It's worth taking a look at this because table relationships are listed. You may be asking how has that happened, as I haven't created any yet. The tables were created in Access and their relationships were imported. In many ways an advantage, as I won't have to create them in Excel. I click OK to close. Take a look at the bottom and you can view the table tabs. Each tab represents a table. If you renamed your tabs, then the tab names will be shown here. Next, I will click Diagram View to show you the table relationships. There's one table with no relationships at present, and that's the entity table. My next step is to save my work to date. You should do this regularly. Be patient as the workbook is large. Once the save is complete, I will reopen Pivot Table by clicking the Manage icon under Power Pivot tab. I'll repeat the earlier steps to add and access database. I click From Database icon and select Access and navigate to Product Categories and click Open. Next, I will test the connection, and all being well, I click Next. Like before, I accept the default radio button and click Next. There is only one table, and as I'm happy with the table name, I click Preview and Filter. I'm happy to proceed, so I click OK and click Finish. I now need to add the Excel worksheets. I click the From Other Sources, then scroll down to select Excel and click Next. As before, I need to browse to the Excel file I want to import. I choose Geography. I left click Test the connection. Assuming all is well, I left click the tick box for Use First Row as Headers. I move on by clicking Next. This is where I can confirm my assumption. The first row lists column names, otherwise referred to as headers. To check this, I click Preview and Filter. Scroll in the table, I confirm my guess was correct, so I click Next. To complete this import, I click Finish, and when complete, I click Close. This would be a good point to save the pivot table again. I have another worksheet to import, so in the pivot table window, I again click the From Other Sources and scroll down to select Excel and click Next. As before, I need to browse to the Excel file I want to import. I choose Stores. I test the connection. I click the Use First Row as Headers tick box and click Next. I select the table and click through to complete the import. The next step to building my data model is to build relationships. Let's revert back to the beginning of the video worksheet image. The table relationships listed here are the ones I'm going to put together now. You may want to pause the video and make some notes regarding these relationships if you are working along with this video. Switching back to the pivot table, I click the diagram view to see what relationships have already been configured using Access Database Import. It's clear the tables I've added require relationships if I'm going to be able to make use of them. As usual, there is more than one way to do so. Method 1. Looking at the menu tab, I choose Design tab by left clicking. I left click the Create Relationship icon. A new window opens. I will close this as I want to show you another way. I left click the Manage Relationship icon. Again, a new window opens. This window lists the current relationships we've seen in the diagram view. To create a new relationship, I click the Create button. Next, I need to choose my source table. I click Table 1, drop down and select Stores. In the Associated Columns list, I left click Entry Key. This column choice should be highlighted. I now need to select the Related table. I left click the Table 2, drop down and choose Entity Table. And in the column, I left click Entity Key to highlight. I then click OK. Next relationship I need to establish is Product Category linked to Product Subcategory. I repeat the previous step by clicking the Create button. Table 1 I choose Dim Product as my table choice, and in the columns I select Product Subcategory Key. For Table 2 I choose Dim Product Subcategory, and in columns I choose Product Subcategory Key and click OK. The other method to building relationships I demonstrated in an earlier video, but I will do so again for those of you who haven't as yet viewed that video. In the pivot table, I click the Home tab. I click the Diagram View icon. I need to locate my Geography table and my Stores table. I can reposition the tables by left clicking the table and holding the left mouse button, drag the table to my preferred location. Next, I need to find my Sales table and locate the Stores key. I left click to highlight and hold the mouse button. I drag the Stores key over to the Stores table store key. As I do so, a line is drawn. Note the sales table line linked to the stores table has an asterisk indicating a many relationship, and the stores end of the line has an arrowhead. This indicates a single relationship. In other words, a store can make many sales, and those sales are associated with one particular store. Next, I need to build a relationship between geography and the stores table. I select the store's geography key, and holding the left mouse button down, I drag the key over to geography table geography key. Again, a line is drawn indicating the relationship. If I wish, I can check the relationships that have been developed to date by clicking the Pivot Table Design tab, then the Manage Relationship icon. In the pop-up window, I can review, edit the 9 relationships that have been built or create additional relationships. Now the data model has been built, let's put it to work. In this section of the video, I'm going to show you how to add calculated columns. This means I'm expanding the data model by adding additional columns to answer questions you and I may have of the data. A calculated column utilizes columns that are already present in our data model. This functionality means I can use mathematical formula to an added column. On screen, you are now viewing a slide stating the calculated column formulas I'm going to add. For example, I want to be able to add net and gross sales. Looking at sales amount column, I can see discounts have been given plus some purchases have been returned. This means an accurate net sales figure must account for these factors. The second calculation I want to compute is the company's gross profit. To do that, I use the calculation net sales minus total cost to give me gross sales. Now you know what I'm going to do, let's create the calculated columns. Firstly, take note you are viewing fact sales table. Using the horizontal scroll bar, move the bar to the right. I'm looking for added column. I click the first empty row in the column. I press the equals key on the keyboard. Note the equals sign is posted in the formula bar. Next, I press the square bracket key on my keyboard. The reason I want to calculate a column. Observe, pressing the open square bracket key immediately reveals a drop-down list of the columns used in the table. I press the letter S on the keyboard and the list is shortened to show only columns beginning with the letter S. I highlight the sales amount to highlight my choice. I want to emphasize, do not press enter, instead press the tab key. This adds to the column to the formula bar. I want to subtract the return amount, so I press the minus key and then the opening square bracket and select the return amount. Again, I press the tab key to press the chosen column. I press the minus key again to subtract the discount amount. Next, I press the opening square bracket key and press the D key on my keyboard and complete the close by pressing the tab key, then enter. What's really impressive is this table holds 2 million rows, and the column was very quickly populated with a calculation. I want to rename the column, so I left click the column header to make this the active choice and right click, and in the drop down side window I choose rename column. I rename the column net sales amount without spaces, and to conform with naming convention used in this database I will use camel casing. As usual, for example, you cannot use some keys such as / when naming columns. Use the same naming convention you use when naming files. I now need to add the second calculation. I repeat the same step previously and place my mouse cursor in the added column first row. Next, I press the equal key and the opening square bracket key. Then I press the letter N and choose net sales, and then press Tab key to close the column choice. Next I press the minus key again, then I press square bracket key and the letter T key and choose total cost and press the Tab key followed by the Enter key. I rename the column gross profit. I should point out, if I return to the net sales amount column and rename it, my gross profit column will return an error. If I wanted to rename the column, I would have to rework, in other words, edit the gross profit column formula to correct the error. These additional columns are part of the data model, which means these columns are available to other tables held in the data model. If you're working along with the series of videos, then I suggest you save your work now. As great as it is to be able to use mathematical formula, we also have the ability to use other Excel functions such as sum, count, lookup, data retrieval. The language is called DAX. It's similar to Excel formula expressions, but leans more towards data interrogation. On screen now, I've listed data and time DAX functions. Day, today, now, month, week, year. Informational DAX functions contains is blank, is error, in number, is text. The maths and trig DAX functions are not as extensive as Excel, nevertheless adequate for most users. Absolute, divide integral, round, these include round up and down, rand, for example in between. Filter functions return all records. We have distinct, we can have whether data is filtered. Functions we don't have in Excel are related and related table. I plan to demo these powerful functions very soon. DAX has text functions concatenate, find, left, right, mid, substitute, trim. Logical DAX functions that we also have in Excel such as or, not, true and false. DAX statistical functions such as average, count, max, min, plus, standard, deviation and variances for analyzing population samples. DAX has unique time intelligent functions. This BI capability was developed to enable us to question data differences across time periods, for example by days, months, years. Example, closing balance year, month, quarter. Next day, next month, next year, previous day, previous month, previous year. Total month to date, total quarter, total year to date. What these functions allow us to do is to calculate the balance of this time period. The balance as of this point in time of the year. If you're familiar with Excel, you probably have the necessary knowledge to be able to make use of many of these functions. Even if you do feel comfortable, I urge you to explore the full range of DAX, and you can do so by going to this link. My next objective is to show you how you can add columns from one table to another. You may well be asking, why would you want to do that? If you have table relationships, surely you can retrieve the data you want. Yes and no. It's a matter of convenience to your users. You may have a need to add columns and hide the source table from your users, and in that way you can make things a little less complicated. Let me expand and provide you with a reason. Take a look at the screen table I'm using. It's the product table, and we are looking at product subcategory. If I place my mouse cursor over the icon in the header, I can see the message pop up, text telling me there is a relationship. Let me expand on this by showing you a related column illustration. I have a product, a Lumia 925 and a Lumia 640, plus a comfort headset. All are listed in a category, but listed in subcategories. The Lumias are listed in 1 and the headset in another. All of these listed in the phones and tables categories. There will be occasions when working with separate tables it's an appropriate approach. Then there will be other times when you want to work with one table to see the product and the subcategories. And to achieve this, we can pull the related columns into a single table we've elected to work with. Let me show you how, using the Related DAX function, we can do that. Returning to the pivot table and having selected the products table, I will use the horizontal scroll bar to locate the Add column. I place the mouse cursor in the first row. I start by pressing the equals key on my keyboard. The equals sign appears in the formula bar. Next, I type the letter R, then E. Note the related highlighted function option appears. Press the tab bar. I now need to add the column name, so I press the opening square bracket key. A list of column names appears, but if I scroll down, I'm shown only the columns for the table I'm currently working with. Before I give a column name, I need to name the table. The table name is Product Category. Note, as I begin to type product, a list appears. Take a look at the icons and some will have a letter T. However, I want product category named Product Category Name. I scroll down to select that and press the tab key. Note the formula bar now shows my selection. I've not finished. I press the closing square bracket key and the closing bracket key. I then press enter. The column is now populated with the category name. I need to rename the column to Product Category. Take note to follow the same naming convention used in other columns, camel casing and no spaces. I now need to add subcategory using the related function. I repeat the same steps as before. I place my cursor in Add Column first row and press the equals key. Next I type the letter R, then E. Note the related highlighted function option appears. Press the tab key. I now need to add the column name, so I press the opening square bracket key and type prod and scroll to select Product Subcategory Name. I then press tab key, then the closing square bracket key, and finally the closing bracket key. The column is populated with subcategory names. Next I need to rename the column. I click the column header title to mark that as my active choice, then right click. In the sub menu I choose rename and type product subcategory. This is how I can apply related function. This related function is very similar to Power Query. In Power Query you can extract data from one table and add it to another. If I choose to create a pivot chart and additional columns I've added, such as calculated columns and related columns, they will be available to me in the newly created Power Pivot. If I click the Power Pivot table icon and select New Worksheet and click OK, in the Fields panel I can scroll down to Product Table and click to expand. I can see the product category and the product subcategory columns are listed. If I scroll to Sales and expand that table list, I see net sales and gross profit columns are now listed. This section of the video we are going to look at data hierarchy. Within the data model you are looking at, you can see we have geographical data. Think of data hierarchy as organizing your data into logical structure. At first you and I might think of the entire world as being the highest level, and below that countries, counties, cities, towns, villages. Supposing Contoso traded within a single city area, then the data will be more granular, for example city, boroughs and post codes. Contoso trades in computers. This would be a category. A subcategory of computers might be desktops, laptops, tablets, mobile phones. Below the subcategory you may have products, for example a Sony Vaio, a Microsoft Surface Pro. Another subcategory might be peripheral devices such as a printer, a scanner, a mouse. Organizing the data into hierarchies simplifies users' steps to finding whatever it is they are searching for. An example might be a Contoso customer wants to know if Contoso sells a particular printer. The salesperson knows his or her branch doesn't have that particular printer in store, but another Contoso store might. He or she can search the entire Contoso inventory subcategory stock for printers and know if the required printer is sold by Contoso, and if another Contoso store has one in stock. Date hierarchies are particularly useful. For example, years, quarters, months, days. If a Contoso customer service employee wants to verify a customer purchase, he or she can do so by searching for sales by date. Data can be rolled up, for example, days into months. Daily sales can be summarized into months, quarters, and years. Of course, this process can be reversed. So let's see how data can be organized into hierarchies to help us users. As you can see, I've opened a Contoso Power Pivot diagram view. The hierarchies are like relationships. Think of hierarchies as relationships within tables, whereas relationships are between tables. Let's take a look at the products table. You may have noticed two icons, top right corner of the table. One magnifies the table, which is great if you need to see the entire table. The other is a hierarchy icon. Click the hierarchy icon. At the bottom you can see a newly created hierarchy entry. Rename it to categories. Locate the product category entry I made earlier. I left click to make the active choice, and holding the mouse button down, drag the product category into the hierarchy category entry just added. Repeat for the subcategory. Next, I close the magnifying option, but I haven't finished. I need to add product name. This entry is listed near the top of the list. I scroll up to find it. I left click to mark this my active selection. I right click, and in the sub-menu window I left click add to hierarchy, and being the only single option for the moment, I choose categories. I scroll down to make sure I did actually complete the task. To help users, it's best to rename things that users will find relevant to them. For example, I can rename product categories to just categories by left clicking the entry and right clicking and choosing rename. I also rename product subcategory to subcategory and product name to product. I'm going to show you another way to do exactly the same thing. I'll move over to date table. I scroll to find calendar year. I left click to highlight. I scroll to locate calendar quarter, and holding the control key down I left click to mark that as selected. I scroll again to find calendar month. I repeat the selection by holding the control key and left clicking. I scroll to find full date label and repeat the control key selection. I should have 4 items highlighted. I right click, and in the drop down window I select create hierarchy. The hierarchy is created for me. All I need to do is scroll down and rename hierarchy to dates, and the entries, for example calendar year to year. I will abbreviate calendar quarter to QTR, and calendar month to month, and finally full date label to date. The final one will be geography. I repeat the previous steps and select continent, name, scroll to region, hold the control key and left click, repeat for state and city, right click and choose create hierarchy and rename to geo group. Next, rename continent, region, country, state, province and city to city. Let's put all this to work. I click the pivot icon and choose pivot table. I accept the default to create a new sheet. Next, in the pivot table fields panel, I take a look at dates and I see date hierarchy. I place a tick in the box. The results are shown in the worksheet. If I click the plus icon on the left of the year, it expands to quarters. If I expand quarters, that opens months. I click the months and that expands into months, repeat, and the final into days. I can do the same for products. I click the hierarchy and place a tick in the box. Results are shown and I can expand audio and Contoso products are listed. For example, I expand Bluetooth headphones. Why do all this? Essentially, the reporting process is simplified and users can tailor their reports to answer questions they have. Possibly another benefit, reports may be easier to understand with the use of visualization tools such as tables, charts and maps. Earlier video I mentioned calculation field and I said I would return to that. We have reached that point and this is where you really begin to see some of the power of Excel BI tools. First, let's summarize where we are at present. The hierarchies and the calculations I created to date are going to be used mostly for labels, filters, columns and rows. Next I'm going to create formulas, otherwise known as measures. Measures are used specifically to represent values. In other words, what I'm doing is using Power Pivot data to summarize data. An example will be to summarize a year's net profit. Think of measures as calculus. In Excel we use all measures all the time. For example, to name a few, sum, average, max, count numbers. We can, when using Power Pivot, create our own formulas using DAX. What we normally do when we use these capabilities in Power Pivot is to add something to the values. Let me demo what I mean. Let's suppose I want to see the net sales for the pivot table. You see on screen now. In the pivot table panel, I locate the fact sales table and expand the contents. I scroll down to find net sales amount and left click to place a tick in the box. If you look at the values section in the panel pivot table panel, you will see the sum of net sales. Looking at the worksheet, you will see the results for this implicit measure. This entry only exists when I use it in this table. If I drag the sum of net sales from the values column, it's removed. Sometimes this may be all you require. However, there may be other times when you want to be able to access this measure all the time. In other words, you want what is called a persistent measure. If I set up this configuration measure, the calculation will appear as a choice in the pivot table fields table, like other entries. In other words, users can always select a choice if they so choose. As promised earlier, I'm now going to show you how to create a calculated field, or what is known as a persistent measure. As you can see, I've opened the Power Pivot window and selected the sales table. Take a look at the bottom of the table above the table tabs. If you don't see the area allocated for calculated field, look up at the Home tab options and click the calculations area icon. I'll click the icon to remove the calculated fields area to show you what you will see without the calculated fields area, and then switch it back on. Next I'll move to the first row column. It doesn't matter what the column is above it. What I'm going to do is to set up a calculation for each sales channel. Let's quickly take a look at Contoso's sales channel by clicking the Dim Channel tab. As you can see, Contoso has stores, Contoso also trades online, plus Contoso has a reseller arm of the business, and lastly a catalogue sales business. Let's switch back to Fact Sales Table. Measures require a name. In addition, a measure has 3 other parts. An element to creating a measure is to state what I want to calculate. Then I need to add a calculated expression, for example, sum average. On screen now you can see the 2 calculations I'm going to build. If you're following along with this video, you may want to pause the video here to note these formulas down. With your cursor in the calculated field first row column, type the name online sales with a colon, then press the equals key. Notice the camel casing. The colon is important because this signifies to Excel this is a name. The equal sign signifies a formula. Press the letter C and A. You should see a drop-down listing a number of function options, one being Calculate, and the other will be Calculated Table. With Calculate highlighted, press the Tab key to enter the function. Note the required expression type is shown. An expression followed by multiple filters. I continue by typing the word sum and press the open bracket key followed by open square bracket, and the colon I need to select is net sales amount, so I type the letter N. Net sales amount is shown and highlighted, so I press the tab key to enter my choice. I press the closing square bracket and the closing bracket key. I type a comma to configure my filter. I type CH and select channel name. And when highlighted, I press the tab key again. Next I press the equals key, then the quotes key. Then I type online and press the quotes key to close. Then I press the closing bracket. This signifies I'm closing the function calculation. Lastly, I press the enter key. If I fail to close the bracket and attempt to close, I will see an error message telling me this expression isn't valid. Sadly, not much help. Nevertheless, it will prevent you from proceeding with an unresolved error. I widen the column to enable me to see the whole figure. This is a currency number, so I'll format the column accordingly. I like large figures to use commas, particularly when it's a large figure, and it's a currency figure. I like the figure to be shown as a currency amount. To do this, I click the Home tab and press the comma and the currency icons. I'm now going to add the second calculation. I'll move down to the next row. I begin by typing store sales, the name for the sales channel, and press the colon key followed by the equals key. Again I press C and A keys and tab, the highlighted calculate function. Immediately after the opening bracket I type sum and press the opening square bracket followed by the letter N for the column name where I want to use. With net sales amount highlighted I press tab key, then to close I add the closing bracket. Immediately afterwards I press the comma key. For the first filter I type CH and select channel name and press tab. Then I press the equals key, then quotes key and type store. Then press the quotes key to close. I'm almost there. I press the closing bracket key, then enter. The figure is large and a currency amount, so I repeat the formatting steps earlier by selecting comma and the currency icon in the Home tab. To summarize, I've created two measures by entering expressions and sums. If I so wish, I could have configured averages or any other type of expression I want to apply. My next objective is to create the other two measures you see on screen now. To move things along, we'll move on to the pivot table. As you can see on screen, I have a pivot table. In the pivot table fields, I select the sales table and expand the table to show me the contents. I scroll down and towards the bottom I see online sales. I click to place a tick in the box and view the results. Take note, online sales choice is automatically added to the Power Pivot Table Fields panel Values section. Viewing the worksheet, you can see the results. Let's assume I want to see the sales results by date. I scroll up to the date table and expand the contents and place a tick in the box. If I click the plus sign icon for the year, I can view the results. I can drill down further by clicking the quarter plus icon. I added store sales by returning to the sales table. and place a tick in a store sales box. When you think about what you are viewing, it's absolutely incredible and a very powerful tool. I hope, like me, you feel inspired. Key performance indicators are visual representations of a number of individuals' performance set against agreed objectives. They are also known as KPIs. KPIs in terms of Power Pivot are based upon calculated specific information contained within Power Pivot measure, in other words, a base value. A measure example would be the measures I created in the previous video section, such as sales and reseller sales. The next KPI component is the comparison value. In the case of KPIs, a target value. An example goal would be catalog sales need to be 5% greater than last month, or yearly sales must be 20% of total sales. Values don't have to be an absolute. For example, performance could be compared against an average. Alternatively, we may have assumptions regarding a business unit's performance. For example, catalog sales are on decline. We can equate assumptions to confirm or reject our expectations. Lastly, we need to equate what is good enough, in other words, status threshold. For example, I earlier said yearly catalog sales need to be 20% of total sales. Would 17% be close enough? Alternatively, how bad is bad? Would 12% of yearly total sales be of concern? Should the indicator switch to red if catalog sales fall below 12%? To summarize, effective KPIs must be agreed by all parties responsible for KPI attainment. We need three components to make KPIs of value. 1. A base value measure. 2. A target value goal. And 3. A status threshold. As you can see, I've switched back to pivot table. I quickly want to show you how to remove a measure. Select the rogue measure and right-click and choose Delete. Let's suppose, for instance, you wanted to edit a measure. For example, let's say online sales needs to be store sales. Left-click the row holding the online sales measure. Switch to the formula bar. At the beginning, you will see the words online sales, and at the end of the formula, you will see the word online. Edit online sales to read store sales. Move to the end of the formula and edit online to read store. That's it. Let's revert back to the original objective. I place my mouse cursor in the online sales row. I right click and select copy. I move to an empty row and place the cursor in the row. I right click and select paste. Alternatively, press the Control key and the letter C key together to copy. Next, I move to the mouse cursor to where I wish to paste the copied item and press the Control key and press the letter V to paste the formula in the row cell. Why did I do this? I need total sales measure to compare to a percentage of total sales. Moving my attention to the formula bar, I place my mouse cursor in the bar to remove the words copy of online. I replace what I deleted with the word total. Total sales doesn't have a filter, so I remove the comma and the dim channel name and online. I require the end bracket, so I keep that. I hit the enter key. I now have total sales. Next, I need a calculation KPI measure. I place the cursor in an empty row. In the formula bar, I type online target, colon. Then press the equals sign key. Then press the letter T key and select total sales and press tab key. Then I press the / key for division and the number 5 to represent 20% target. Alternatively, I press the asterisk key to represent multiply and the number 0.05. I cannot just type 20%. I need a target measure for reseller sales. I copy the formula and paste it into the empty row. Remove the word online and replace it with reseller. At the end of the formula, I remove the 0.05 and replace that with the number 3. I'm setting a growth target of 1/3. I now want to create online sales performance KPI. I place the mouse cursor in the online sales row. I can click the Create KPI icon in the ribbon. Alternatively, I can right click and in the sub-menu choose Create KPI. KPI base field should hold a value of online sales. The define target value measure, I select online target. Now I need to set target values. If I choose the traffic lights, I have 3 options to set. Supposing my requirement was for multiple settings, I can click bar chart icon set or the square icon set. I'm going to choose the traffic light square, triangle and circle set. My principal reason, the different shapes appear more distinctive if printed in black and white. Now I've chosen my icon style, I must set the targets. The default is self-explanatory. Red is poor, yellow is acceptable, green is good. If I wanted a measure for total quality management scenario such as defective food items, I would choose the below icon set. Green suggests low values are best, yellow okay, red to be avoided. If I select the next option set, I would use this if my requirement was to hit a particular target value. Let's say I was managing an event budget. I could measure the degree of underspend or overspend, or preferably I've purchased all that was asked of me to buy, and possibly I've managed to keep some of the budget as a contingency fund to cover me for unforeseen last-minute items. I can move the target by clicking my target choice to make it my active choice and then move the measure either to the right or left. Alternatively, I can type the figure in the box rather than drag the slider. If the measures are close together, then that tells me the margin for error is low. What's important here is to talk to stakeholders when setting thresholds. After all, they are the ones that must attain the goals. I'm going to set online sales acceptable level of sales at 25% and good level of sales at 70%. I click OK. If I look at online sales calculated row, I can see an icon representing a KPI has been set. Suppose on reflection I thought the targets need resetting. I right click and choose Edit KPIs. Now I'm going to create KPI for reseller sales. I select the row, right click and choose Create KPI. In the calculated field, I select Reseller Target. I accept the traffic light icon set, but I will take the opportunity to change the acceptable level of sales to 20% and good sales target level to 65%. Ideally, if targets are to have any value to the organization's targets, need to be set and left to run for a good period of time. Of course, there may be good reason to review targets on a regular basis. It really depends upon the requirements of the organization. I click OK to close. As you can see, I switched back to pivot table. Looking at the pivot table rows fields, I remove the categories. In the column field, I remove values. In the value fields, I remove all. The only one I need is dates in the row fields. I expand the sales table if it's not already open. I scroll down and click to expand online sales. I left click to place a tick in value online sales goal and status. I do the same for resellers sales. I place a tick in value, goal and status. On most occasions, KPIs are shown without the value and goal just the status box ticked. If I collapse the dates to year, this representation is clear. If I wish to remove grand totals, which in this case is relevant, I click the Pivot Table Tools Design tab in the ribbon bar and click the grand total icon and select Off for rows and columns. I can expand the dates to quarters. What is good about this graphical representation is good or bad patterns can help users to identify trends. Thank you for viewing this video. Hopefully the content will be of some use to you. The next video will cover maps linking data to geographical areas. Such representations can help users to quickly identify locations of activity or inactivity and where attention should be focused.